Hilchos Issurei Biah Perek Shmoina Asar. The Laws of Forbidden Relationships, chapter 18. We're continuing on the Kohanim. Specifically today, we're zooming in to the Zoina. The word Zoina appears in the verse, forbidding the Kohanim on who to marry. It says, Isha Zoina v'chalala lo yikachu. They shall not take for themselves, they shall not marry a woman who is a Zona. Zona literally means promiscuous, a prostitute. But the Rambam is going to explain today that actually it's not so simple. For the Kohanim, the prohibition against the Kohen marrying a Zona has a very specific connotation. And I'll let the Rambam say it himself. Halacha Aleph mipi Shmuel lamadnu. We learned from oral tradition directly from Moshe Rabbeinu on Mount Sinai. Shehazoina ha'amura b'Torah. That when the Torah uses the expression Zoina in the context of the Kohen, it refers to one of three women. He, kol she'eina bas Yisrael. Number one, it means a woman who's not Jewish. A non-Jewish woman immediately goes into the category of a Zona. We'll soon see, even if she converts, even if she's a freed slave, she was born non-Jewish, she's a Zona. Number two, oy bas Yisrael sheniva lo la'adam, shehi asura lihi naselai. A Jewish woman who had relations with a man whom she's forbidden to marry, isur hashave lakoil, a universal prohibition. We'll soon see what that excludes. And number three, Aisha Nivala Lechalal, a special law. She had relations with a Chalal. A Chalal is a man who is a product of a Kohen forbidden union. So if a Kohen were to marry a divorcee and they have a child, that son is a Chalal. And if a Chalal goes ahead and marries a Jewish woman, even though the marriage is totally fine, totally permitted, even though she's permitted to marry him, she becomes a Zaina by that marriage. So you see already that getting the name Zaina has nothing to do necessarily with being in a forbidden relationship. You could be in a permitted relationship. In this case, marrying a Chalal, and you're already considered a Zaina with regards to the Kohen. So it's a very specific type of classification that comes straight from Moshe Rabbeinu on Mount Sinai. Lefichach, therefore, because the classification of Zona is very specific, Hanir Bas la Behema. What if a woman has relations with an animal, afal pi shehi biskila, even though the prohibition holds her liable to stoning? Loi nasa zaina. By dint of those relations, she hasn't become a zaina. V'loi nifsla la kahuna, and she hasn't become disqualified for the priesthood. Shaharei loi nivala la adam, because it wasn't a man involved in the relations. It has to be a man. V'habal hanida. Fascinating. If somebody has relations with a nida, a woman who's on her menstrual cycle, she hasn't yet gone to the mikveh. Afal pisha he bekares, even though having relations with a woman typically holds you liable to excision. This woman doesn't become a zaina. She's not disqualified to the priesthood. For example, if her husband then passes away, she can marry a Kohen. Because technically, she's not forbidden to marry the guy. The Rambam defined it as having relations with a person who it's forbidden to marry. A nida, while there's a prohibition involved, you're allowed to marry her. Halacha beis v'chein habal hapnuya. Another counterintuitive result. You have a Jew who has relations with an unmarried girl, out of wedlock. Afilu haisa kedesha shehifkira atzma lakoil. Even if she's a well-known prostitute, she makes herself available to everybody. Afal pi shehi b'malkos. Even though, again, having relations with her would have you violate a prohibition and you'd be liable to lashes. By dint of these relations, she doesn't become a zaina, and thereby she doesn't become disqualified to the priesthood. Because again, this unmarried woman, yes, she's acting like a prostitute, but you're allowed to marry her. There's no prohibition against marrying her, and therefore, having relations doesn't make her into a zaina. But what if a woman has relations with a man who she's forbidden to have relations with by dint of a negative prohibition? Negative prohibition, which encompasses all Jews. Not the ones unique to the Kohanim. A regular Jew cannot marry such a person, let's say a mamzer, something like that. Or she gets married to a man who is forbidden by a positive commandment. For example, one of those converts from the nations who we cannot marry, like an Ammon convert, a Moab convert, and those types of things. Needless to say, if she marries somebody who she's forbidden to on account of the highest level biblical prohibition, the erva, oila oivet kechavim umazalis ve'eved, or to an idol-worshipping Gentile, or to a slave. Since the marriage could never be sanctified by the Torah, it's forbidden marriage, so if they have relations, that transfers her into a zona and she can no longer marry a Kohen. Same thing with a female convert or a female freed slave. Even if she converted or was freed at an age less than 3 years old. When we say that even had she had relations, her hymen would regenerate, and so there could seemingly be no issue. Since she's not a born Jewess, she is a prostitute. In other words, she's considered to be a zayna, and is forbidden to marry a Kohen. Based on this, the sages said, an idol-worshipping Gentile, or a man from the Nesinim nation, the Gibeonites, who converted and tricked the Jewish people into thinking they were one of the regular nations, not one of the seven. A mamzer, or an illegitimate person, a ger amoinu, a avi, or a Ammon or Moab convert, a mitzri v'adaimi rishon v'sheni, or first, second generation Egyptian convert, Edomite convert, a petzu adako krus shavcha, or a man with maimed reproductive system, a chalal shabo al hayehudis, or a chalal, a Kohen, a man born from a Kohen forbidden union. If any of these people had relations with a Jewish girl, since they're all in the categories of prohibitions or positive commandments, some kind or another, they have made this woman into a zayna, disqualified her from the priesthood. If she herself was daughter of a priest, they've also disqualified her from ever eating truma. Again, because in order to eat truma, you have to have never had relations that make you into a zayna. Same thing if a woman was waiting in the wings for yibum, her husband passed away childless, and she has a brother-in-law who is supposed to do yibum or chalitza. But before he does that, she goes ahead and has relations with someone else, asa a zayna, that someone else has made her into a zayna and forbids her from marrying a priest. V'ha'ailenis, a woman who is incapable of giving birth. She never manifested physical signs of maturity. Muteres l'kohen ve'eina zayna. She is permitted to a Kohen. We don't classify her as a zayna. She never engaged in the forbidden relations. She simply never developed fully. Halacha daled haba al achas mehashniyos v'chayetze behen. A man who has relations with one of the women who are called shniyos, secondary prohibitions, they're rabbinic prohibitions, like great-grandparents, etc. Kagen haba al krevas chalutzasei. Here's an example. A person who has relations with the relative of the woman on who he performed chalitza. So here's the case. This guy passed away childless, leaving the wife. The brother-in-law does chalitza. So the blue woman here becomes a chalutza. Now this guy has relations with the pink woman, who is the sister of this chalutza. That is biblically permitted, rabbinically prohibited. She's a shniya. So he has relations with krevas chalutza, say the relative of his chalutza, oy al chalutza, or the chalutza herself. Once you dissolve the bond through chalitza, you're never supposed to remarry her. And he does. Again, rabbinically prohibited. Loy asa isa zayna. In these two cases, he doesn't make these two women into a zayna, because biblically, there's no prohibition for them to be married, as we explain in the laws of Yibum. Taking all these last four halachot into account, the Rambam summarizes. From this, you have learned. The classification of a woman being a zayna is not dependent on her engaging in a forbidden relationship. Because we gave three examples of forbidden relationships. Relations with a nida, a prostitute, an animal. In all these cases, she's had a forbidden relationship, doesn't become a zayna. On the other hand, you have a woman marrying a chalal, a totally permitted relationship, and she becomes a zayna. Rather, the matter only depends on the blemish that's caused by the relations, and that we only learn from halacha l'maisha misinai. From the oral tradition we have learned, she'ena peguma ella me'adam ha'asr la ay mechalal k'meisha amarnu. The only woman who gets blemished in this way is from a human being, a man, who is forbidden to her, or from a chalal, as we explained. In other words, we go with the Torah's bar. We don't make our own bars. There's no general rules or blanket statements you can apply to show how you make a zayna. Whatever the Torah says is a zayna, is a zayna. Halacha vav. When a woman has relations with a man who classifies her as a zayna, then whether the relations are being held in rape, against her will, or willfully, consensually, whether she's doing it purposely or inadvertently, whether the natural way or the unnatural way, the moment he inserts the beginning of the organ into her, he disqualifies her as a zayna. As long as the girl is 3 years old and up, and the boy is 9 years old and up. Therefore, because even rape can make a woman into a zayna, if you have a married woman who has relations with someone else, she commits adultery, whether forcefully or willfully, she becomes prohibited to the priesthood. Why is this a novelty? Because we learned before, in a previous book, that if the wife of a regular Jew commits adultery, then only if it's consensual, she becomes forbidden. If a regular Israelite's wife is just raped, they can stay married. But here the Rambam is talking about an account of priesthood, account of zayna, having relations with someone else. Even by rape, disqualifies her from the kahuna. Halacha Zayin, the Rambam basically brings out the rules that I just mentioned. Eishes Kohen Shenensa, the wife of a Kohen who is raped. Baila Loike Aleha Mishum Tuma. Her husband, if he has relations with her again, gets lashes on account of her defilement. Israelite's wife can be raped and they can stay married, but a Kohen's wife cannot. And the Rambam actually demonstrates that the Kohen's law is the default law. The fact that an Israelite's wife can stay married is a novelty. Shenemar, as it says, and this is the verse which describes the prohibition after adulterous relationships. It says, Lo yuchal balo harishan asher shilcha, the first husband who sent her away is not able lashuv lekachta liyes leili isha, to go back and take her again to be his wife, acharei asher hu tama, since she has been defiled. So in context, this law is talking about a case where a man divorces his wife, she has relations with someone else, and the prohibition is to remarry her. You cannot remarry a divorcee after she has relations with someone else. But there's an extra word here in the verse. These 3 words, acharei asher hu tama, because she has been defiled, the Talmud learns from this that this is the source for not being allowed to have relations after your wife has relations with someone else. This is the basic, huh? Okay, there's no, again, Torah can't talk about every single case. If you're aware that she's defiled, so now that she's defiled, you cannot marry her. Now, this verse doesn't say anything about rape or consensual, hakol baklal. All women, all types of relationships are included in this prohibition. Sheim nivalu, asurin al ba'aleim. That if a woman, in the context of a marriage, has an extramarital relationship, asurin al ba'aleim, she is forbidden to her husband. Which would sound like even by rape, no matter if you're a Kohen or an Israelite. Now, we have a novelty, Parat lecha hakasuv be'eshes Yisrael shenensa. There's a special verse which specifies that if it's the wife of an Israelite who is raped, she muteres lebayla, that she remains permitted to her husband. Shenemar, as it says, in the context of the soita, the suspected adulteress, what does it say? That only if she is secluded, v'hi loy nispasa, and she was not forced, that's when X, Y, and Z, the law goes into effect, that he has to take her to the Beis Hamikdash and give her the waters and see if she was adulterous or not. Which implies that if she was raped, the whole law doesn't begin, they can stay married. But this is only said about an Israelite's wife. Aval Eishes Kohen, but a Kohen's wife, she remains in her status of being forbidden, because she is a zayna by having had forbidden relationships, even if she was raped. So this is where we see the difference between a Kohen's wife and an Israelite's wife. Now, halacha ches, eishes Yisrael shenensa, if an Israelite's wife was raped, afal pishim muteres lebayla, even though she can remain permitted to her own husband, asura likahuna. At this point, she becomes forbidden for the Kohen. To become a zayna, even rape qualifies as a zayna. And so if her husband will die, she cannot marry a Kohen. Eishes kohen shamra lebayla. So in light of this, let's see what happens in this case. The wife of a Kohen comes home one day. She tells her husband, Nasti, you should know I was raped today. I shagagti uba alay echad, or I was inadvertent, I thought it was you. Someone else had relations with me. Or one witness comes and testifies to the Kohen that his wife was adulterous, bein ba'inas, bein beratzin, whether by rape or consensually. So in these cases, since we don't have two witnesses, harezu eina asura alav, she's not forbidden to him. Shema ineha nasna be'acher, maybe the wife set her eyes on another man, and she knows that just by rape she becomes forbidden to the Kohen. So she figures, no problem, I'll come home, I'll say I was raped, and then he'll have to divorce me. Now, if the Kohen trusts his wife very deeply, or he trusts the witness, and his mind trusts their words, so then he should divorce her to leave the doubt. Because he trusts her. If he trusts her and she actually comes home and says, listen, I was raped, they got to end the marriage. Halacha tes, Eishes Kohen she'amra lebayla ne'nasti. A Kohen's wife tells her husband, I was raped, afal pishim muteres lebayla kamesha b'yarnu. Even though we just said that she can stay permitted to her husband, after her husband dies, she'll be forbidden to any other Kohen. Why? Because by her own admission, she's a zayna. She herself admitted that she's a zayna. The asra atzma, she has forbidden herself. The nasis kachaticha ha'asura, she becomes like a forbidden piece of non-kosher meat. When you come to court and you say, I was raped, that you're declaring your own problems. So for your own husband, we're not going to take you out. But after that, forbidden to every Kohen. Halacha Yud Kohen shekidesh gedolai ketana. A Kohen consecrates a woman, whether an adult or a minor. After a while, he has relations with her, and he comes to court claiming that he found her stepped on by another man, which means he thinks she had relations with someone else before him. Nesra lav misafek. So here, the doubt itself prohibits her. This is in contrast to a regular Jew who makes such a claim, as we saw in the laws of marriage, and the Rambam will repeat it now. With a Kohen, there's only one doubt. Shema kodim kiddushin nivala or achar kiddushin. What's the doubt? We don't know when she had relations. Did she have relations before the consecration? In which case, he would be permitted to her. Or they had relations after the consecration, in which case she would be forbidden. Aval Yisrael shatan tainazu. But if a regular Jew makes this claim, consecrates a woman, has relations, and then says, you know what, I think you were fooling around before, loy nesra alav. She doesn't become forbidden to her husband, sheyesh kan shnei sfeikus, because over here there's two doubts. Shema koidem kiddushin, v'shema achar kiddushin. First of all, maybe she had relations before the consecration, which is no problem, but maybe it was after, which is a problem. But even in the second option, v'afilu noimar la'achar kiddushin, shema ba'ines shema beratzin. Even if we say it was after the consecration, well, maybe it was rape. Now that maybe it was rape, you cannot say for a Kohen, because even if it was rape, it's still forbidden. For a regular Jew, you have a double doubt. A raped woman is permitted to a Jew, as we explained. Therefore, if a father consecrates his daughter to a Jewish man when she's less than 3 years old, and later on the husband claims that he found her stepped on by another man. In other words, he thinks she was fooling around before. Here, there's only one doubt. And that one doubt is enough to prohibit her. There's only one doubt here. And maybe it was rape, maybe it was consensual. And the other option of before consecration is not a doubt, because before consecration she was less than 3 years old, in which case her relations have no significance. Therefore, since only one doubt, when in doubt about a biblical prohibition, we always go stringently and we make her forbidden. Halacha Yud Beis. Kol isha shekini la baila v'nistera v'lo shasas mesaita. A woman who was warned by her husband against going into seclusion with a man, she goes into seclusion. So the law is she has to drink the sota waters, the bitter waters. Let's say she didn't have a chance to. Asura la kohen. Right away she becomes forbidden to a Kohen, even if her husband drops dead afterwards. Mipnei she's fake zayna, because she's in doubt. Maybe she's a zayna. And the fact of this matter remains, bein shaloi ratza hi lishtos. Whether it's a case where she doesn't even want to drink the waters. Bein shaloi ratza lahashkaiso, or the husband doesn't want to give her to drink. Bein shahaisa sham eidos shamayna milishtos, or there was a testimony that would stop her from drinking. Bein shakinu la bezdin, or maybe it was the court who had warned her instead of her husband, in which case she doesn't drink. Bein shahaisa min hanashim she'ein ru'uyais lishtos, so she's one of the 15 women that we listed in the end of the fourth book that cannot drink the bitter waters. Since the bottom line is she didn't drink the waters, harezu asura la kahuna misafek, the doubt itself forbids her from marrying a Kohen. Halacha Yud Gimel, Pnuya Shara'ua Shanivala Le'echad V'halach. We see an unmarried woman have relations with someone, and the guy walks away. We don't know who he is. The Amrullah, so we come to the woman and we ask her, Mihu zeh shaba alayich? who's the man who had relations with you? V'amra adam kasher. And she says it was a kosher man. It was an acceptable man. It wasn't somebody who would make me forbidden to marry a Kohen. Harezu ne'emenes, she is believed. V'lo yoy, not only that. Ela afilu ra'uha mi'uberes. Even if we didn't see the man, we only see her pregnant. V'amru la mimini sabart. And we ask her, who impregnated you? V'amra mi'adam kasher. She says it was a kosher man. Harezu ne'emenes v'tiyam v'teres l'kohen. She is believed. And by the dry law, we'll see in a second some exceptions, by the dry law, she's permitted to marry a Kohen.
She's not a virgin anymore, so the
Kohen Gadol would have a problem with her, yes. But a regular Kohen is allowed. When do we say this though? Only if a couple of conditions are met. The place where she had relations has to be a crossroads, or in a carriage that's traveling through a field, where many people are passing by. And the majority of the passers-by are acceptable people for the kahuna. And the majority of the city closest to here, where the people came from, are also kosher. So follow this. First of all, it has to be in a public place, outside of the city. And there has to be two majorities. The majority of the passers-by are kosher, and the majority of the city members are kosher. Because the sages made a stringency when it comes to genealogy, and they required two majorities. But if most of the passers-by were people that they had relations, would disqualify her from the kahuna, like Gentiles, or illegitimate mamzerim, and the like, then, even if the majority of the place where they came from would be kosher people, but the passers-by majority are non-kosher, or the majority of the city members are not kosher, even though the majority of passers-by are acceptable, then we have to worry. Maybe the one she had relations with does disqualify her, and therefore initially she should not marry a Kohen. But if she did get married after the fact, we're going to go with the version that says loy teitze. Some Rambams have the word teitze. We go with loy teitze. After the fact, we don't force her out. Why? Because the bottom line is there's at least one majority of kosher people. The sages wanted to have two majorities, fine. But after the fact, if you only had one majority, it's okay. Now, this is all if she had relations outside of the city, where people are not in their natural habitat. They've moved from the city. But if she was in the city, having relations or pregnant, even if in the entire city there's only one Gentile or one chalal or one slave, she cannot initially marry a Kohen after that. We have a basic principle in halacha. When something is stationary, its status is always 50-50. All the people in the city are stationary in their places. They haven't moved. In the last case, they left the city. They're out of their place. When things are out of their place, we always say the rule that says, Kol de parish meruba parish. When something separates, it separates from the majority. But when it's stationary, everyone's in the city, so we don't know who she had relations with. We have to assume it's 50-50. 50-50 chance she had relations with that one Gentile in the city. Now, after the fact again, if she gets married, we're not going to force her out of the marriage. She herself is saying it was a kosher man with whom I had relations. So we'll believe her on her own words. But initially, we won't let her get married. What if the woman was mute or deaf mute? Or she says, I don't know who it was had relations with. I don't know who the father is. She's a minor. She doesn't know the difference between who's kosher and who's unacceptable. By dint of those relations, she is a doubtful zayna. She cannot marry a Kohen, not even after the fact. If she marries a Kohen, she must leave the marriage. Unless there's a double majority of kosher people. That means the majority of the passers-by and the majority of the city which they came from are both kosher. Then we'll say, you know what? After the fact, you can stay married to the Kohen. And now we enter for the next few halachot the laws of a captive woman. To what extent do we say that a captive woman has had relations and becomes a zoina? Hashvuya shenifdes. A captive woman is freed. V'hi bas shalosh shanim v'yem echad yeser, at an age of more than 3 years old. Asura la kohen. She is now forbidden forevermore to a kohen. Mipnei shehi sfeik zoina. Shema nivala le'evik chavim mazales. She is a doubtful zoina. Perhaps she had relations with one of her Gentile captors. V'im yesh la 8. Shalei nisyachet. Oivit chavim mazales ima. But here's a leniency. If she has even one witness who can say for sure that she was never in seclusion with a Gentile, she remains kosher to the Kohen, kosher to the priesthood. Even a slave or a maidservant or a relative, usually disqualified for testimony, they are believed for this testimony. Even if you have 2 captive women, each one testifying for the other one. So they're probably in cahoots. They're believed. Since the whole idea of a doubt is only prohibited rabbinically, therefore the rabbis were lenient when it came to a captive woman, and they allowed these lower level witnesses to declare them pure and permitted to the kahuna. So too even a child, as long as he was talking innocently in the course of conversation, and he mentions that he was also in captivity, and he knows this woman was never in seclusion, Neman, he is believed. The Rambam brings a story where even a son was believed about his mother. There was a story about a boy who was captured with his mother. And her son was talking innocently in the course of conversation. And he said, myself and my mother were captured by the idol-worshipping Gentiles, but I was always mindful of her. I went to draw water, my mind was with my mother. I went to gather wood, my mind was with my mother. Based on this testimony, the sages allowed her to marry a Kohen. Because the child, he wasn't saying it as a direct testimony, he was talking in the course of conversation. And he mentioned casually that his mother was never alone, permitted. Yutes, even though we're lenient about captive women, ein habal nemon lahoyid be'ishtei ashvuya shalei nitma. A husband himself is not believed to testify about his own wife that was captured, that she didn't become impure. She'ena dameid la'atzma. We have a principle: a man cannot testify about himself, right? Because he wants to bring her back to him. That's not allowed. So to the maidservant, her maidservant cannot testify about her. The maidservant belonging to her husband could testify for her. If her maidservant was talking casually in the course of conversation, she is believed whatever she says. Halacha chaf. You have a Kohen who is being the witness, testifying for this captive woman that she's pure. He cannot marry her. Maybe he set his eyes on her, and he knows that if one witness comes and says she's pure, sages will believe her, allow her to marry a Kohen. So since he's the Kohen, he's probably biased, so we don't believe him. But if he paid money to ransom her, and then testifies, he could marry her. If he didn't know for a fact that she was pure, he wouldn't spend money on her. Jews are very careful with their money. Put the money where their mouth is. Put down the money, that shows that he's believable. A woman shows up in court, and she says, you should know I was captured, but I stayed pure. Nobody had relations with me. Ne'emenes, she is believed. We have a principle: the mouth that forbade is the mouth that permitted. We wouldn't know anything about her had she not said anything. She says she's captured. Her words make her forbidden. Then she says, I'm pure. Her words make her permitted. She's our only source of information, so we believe whatever she says. Even if there was one witness outside of her words that's saying that she was taken captive, but she's saying she was pure, she's good. But if there's 2 witnesses that she was captured, so then we don't need her to know that she was captured. She's not believed unless one of those witnesses themselves will say that she's pure. But her own words, we don't believe her. What if you have 2 witnesses that are saying she was captive, but they themselves are arguing as to what happened to her. They both agree she was captive. Ve'ed echad meid shenitmes, ve'echad makri shoysai umeid la shehi tahira. One of them is saying she became defiled, and one of them is saying no, she stayed pure. And no Gentile was alone with her till she was redeemed. Even if the one saying that she is pure was a woman or a maidservant, she's allowed, she's permitted. We need to have either both of them saying she was defiled with nobody arguing in order to make her forbidden. Chav Beis. Misha Amra Nishbeistu Tahirani V'Tirua Beis Din Lihinase. A woman says, I was captured, but I'm pure, and based on her words, the sages allowed her to get married. Then show up two witnesses and say, we know she was captured. So had they come before, we wouldn't believe the woman. But since they came after the license was granted, she can get married initially, never leaving her permitted state. Even if her own captor came into the court after her. We watching, she's still captive. Her master is right here. The woman doesn't leave the status of being permitted, which the sages imposed upon her. But since the captor is here, the sages will put together some guards to protect her that she shouldn't get secluded till she gets redeemed. But the point is, she came in first, she established her permissibility, that status does not go away. Now, that's only if the witnesses that come afterwards say she was taken captive. They don't say anything worse than that. If two witnesses show up later and actually say that she was defiled, we watched her have relations in captivity, then even if she was married, even if she had multiple children, she must leave the marriage. Because now we got clear testimony that she was actually defiled. One witness means nothing. A woman says, I was captured but I'm pure. Not only that, I have witnesses that can prove it, that can say that I was pure. We don't say, let's wait till the witnesses come. Right away we permit her. Not only that, even if there's a rumor circulating that she has witnesses who will testify to her defilement, doesn't matter. Right now we have permissibility. We permit her till they show up. Because with captive women, the sages were lenient. Chav Dalet. Ha'av sha'amar, if a father says, Kidashti es biti v'geirashtiha, I consecrated my daughter, and I divorced her, I oversaw the divorce, and she's still a minor. Neman, he's believed. She's now considered a divorcee, and any laws pertaining to that are kept. However, if the father says, Kidashtiha v'geirashtiha k'sharisa ketana, v'arehi gedoyla, I consecrated and oversaw the divorce of my daughter while she was a minor, but right now she's an adult, he's not believed to put her in the status of being a divorcee because right now she's an adult out of his jurisdiction. If a father says, my daughter was captured and I redeemed her, whether an adult or a minor, he's not believed. A father does not have rights over his daughter's status in terms of being a zayna, in terms of being a divorcee or marriage-related things that he has believability. The Torah only gives him the credibility to forbid her on account of marriage. As it says, as biti nasati lo ish hazeh. This is the source in the Torah. A father can say, I gave my daughter to this man. He has the believability about who he marries, offers his daughter to. But not to disqualify her on account of being a zayna, that he cannot do. So he has no believability about the status of a captive daughter. When the wife of a Kohen becomes forbidden to him on account of her being captive, since the whole prohibition is in doubt, the sages allowed her to live in the same courtyard, provided that her kids or some household member is always there to watch that no seclusion happens. They can stay technically married or living in the same courtyard. Chavav, Ir Shaba Bamatzar V'Nichbesha, a city which had siege laid onto it and it was conquered by Gentiles. Im hayu ha'ivdei kechavim u'mazalis, makifin nesa'ir mikol rucheiseha. If the Gentiles were surrounding the city on all sides, not even one woman can escape without being seen and placed into the possession of the idol-worshipping Gentiles. And every single woman in the city is considered to be captive and disqualified to the priesthood. Maybe they had relations with the Gentile captors. Unless she was less than 3 years old, of course, in which case the relations don't matter. But any woman above that is considered to be disqualified. But if at least one woman could escape without them being aware of it, or there was a hiding spot in the city, even if it could only hold one woman, that hiding spot or that ability to escape will permit everybody, will save everybody. How so? Ketzad matzeles. How does it save everybody? From now on, shekol isha she'amra tohira ani ne'emenes. Any woman who will declare, I am pure, she's believed. Va'afal pi she'ein la'ed, even without a witness. Why? Mitoich she'yechayla leimar. Nimlatati kishenich b'shaha'ir. Since she would have been able to say, I escaped when the city was conquered, because it was possible to escape. Or since she could have said, I was in the hiding spot and I was saved, so now she's also believed to say, I didn't escape, I didn't hide, and I'm telling you I wasn't impure. This is called migu. When a person has a better lie to say, we don't assume that they're lying. She could have said, I was in the hiding spot, or I escaped. She didn't say that. So we believe her that she's saying the truth, and she didn't become impure. When do all these laws apply? If the battalion that took over the city was from this country, was from this region, they settled down in the city, they're not afraid. So we worry that perhaps they went around raping women. But if it's a battalion from a different region, a different country, invading this city, conquering it, pillaging, and moving on, then the women don't become forbidden. They don't have time to rape. They want to take all the spoils and run away. Now, of course, if they actually captured women, took them into their own possession, even if right away the Jews chased them and rescued them, they are forbidden. If a single woman was kidnapped by idol-worshipping Gentiles, if it was over financial matters, she's permitted. They wouldn't rape her because they know that if they did, they may not get back the money that they're owed. But if they're taking her for death matters, they wanted to kill her, then she's forbidden to a Kohen even if she's rescued, because we assume that probably she was raped. Therefore, in the case where her husband was a Kohen, she's forbidden to him. When do we say this? When is there a difference between money and capital issues? When the Jewish people have the power and the Gentiles are afraid of them. But if the idol-worshipping Gentiles were in power, then even if they kidnap a woman for financial matters, since she becomes in the possession of the idol-worshipping Gentiles even for a second, she's forbidden on all accounts. Unless one witness testifies about her that she was pure, like a regular captive woman, as we've explained.